Arsenal are top of the Premier League table going into Christmas. This is not a drill. The Gunners are literally 5 points clear of Manchester City going into Christmas. And you know what that means? More often than not, whoever is top of the table by Christmas goes on to win the league. We're not trying to jump the gun here, it's just how things almost always are in the Premier League. But hey, we know the job is definitely not complete. In fact, far from it. But the journey so far is surely worth admiring, commending and talking about, especially when you consider how far they have come as a football club. After that incredible season the Gunners had in 2003 to 2004, winning the Premier League title without losing a single game all season, it seemed like the club slowly started to crumble and fall over the years. Sure, 2 years later they came close to achieving something they had never achieved before after they had reached the Champions League final, but they were not able to clinch that trophy and still haven't till date. The team began to struggle so much in the late 2000s, at least by the standards they had set in the 90s and early 2000s, the trophies literally dried up after 2005 when they won the FA Cup. From then on, Arsenal had to slowly start embracing their new reality. A new reality when securing Champions League qualifications were a huge achievement. Of course, the fans were very dissatisfied with that. As far as they were concerned, they had reached rock bottom. It couldn't possibly get worse than this, so they wanted change. So they started asking for Wenger to leave every season for a few years. It was a huge call for the owners to make, considering how he transformed the club and all that he helped them achieve, but it looked like the time had come to make that call. Wenger eventually left his position as Arsenal manager in 2018, after 22 years in charge, and Arsenal fans quickly found out how wrong they were. It surely could get worse, and it did. Unai Emery took over as coach of Arsenal in 2018 and was not able to get Arsenal competing again. It seemed like the Europa League was now the new normal for them. Now surely it couldn't get worse than this for them. So Emery was let go a season and a half after he was hired. But boy, they were wrong yet again. The club hired Mikel Arteta to take over from Emery in 2019. He was a former player and of course knew the club. But he had absolutely no experience being the head coach of a football club. And after he ended his first half season in 8th outside of both the Champions League and Europa League places, fans were already thinking maybe the club had got it wrong with the coaches yet again. 8th was a new low for them. Each time they thought they could go no lower, they sank deeper. Fans did not care that change did not exactly work the last 2 times, they wanted immediate change yet again. They started screaming Arteta out, but the club decided to be patient and trust the process. And the trophies he won that season were surely very helpful in strengthening that trust and confidence. Yes, they had finished 8th in the Premier League, but they won the FA Cup and then the Community Shield. These trophies surely did a whole lot in helping the club and fans trust the process. They decided to give Arteta more time, but in his first full season, it was like everything went back to status quo. He finished 8th on the Premier League table again, and this time there weren't any trophies to make that look a little less ugly. The Arteta out screams started to get loud again. Quite a number of fans wanted him out immediately, but the club still insisted on being patient. And last season, that patience began to pay off as things sort of began to take shape. The vision slowly started to become clearer and fans were coming on board. The 2021-22 season didn't actually start out well, with Arsenal losing the opening game of the season to newcomers and city rivals, Brentford. But the North London club were able to drag themselves back up after such a poor start, and as the season was coming to an end, they were in pole position to finish in the top 4. Remember, the club hadn't finished in the top 4 of the Premier League table since the 2015-16 season when they finished as runners-up to the champions Leicester City. So getting back in the Champions League after 5 seasons away would have been a huge sign of progress, but unfortunately it was not to be. Not that time at least. Arsenal had played so well and pretty much had a top 4 spot in their hands, but they somehow managed to throw that away with just a few games to go. Fans were livid. And to be fair, the manager and players were livid with themselves. It felt like they were always taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But in spite of that stagger at the end of the season, the fans showed more faith. The fans had now started to believe in Mikel Arteta and back him even when he was making some really big calls. Like stripping Aubameyang of captaincy, relegating him to the bench and finally terminating his contract and forcing him out of the club mid-season. Aubameyang was the club's biggest player and frankly sharpest in front of goal. After all, he was the only one in the squad who had won a Premier League Golden Boot. But Arteta didn't care about all of that if it also came with indiscipline, so he forced him out. Many thought the Spanish boss would come to regret that decision, especially when he also let Lacazette walk only months later, but there seems to be absolutely no regrets now. People asked where the goals would come from, and Arteta gave a swift response to that by managing to convince Gabriel Jesus to join Arsenal from Manchester City in the summer. The Brazilian immediately fit perfectly into the squad and into Arteta's vision of building a solid team of youngsters. He also brought back Saliba, who had always been an Arsenal player but had been away on loan for years, and immediately integrated him into the first team. Then he also let the likes of Pepe, Torreira and Lino go and gave bigger responsibilities to youngsters like Saka, Martinelli and Ramsdale. Talking about responsibilities, he gave the biggest of all to a 24-year-old. He named Martin Odegaard, who had barely been at the club for 2 years, captain of the new-looking squad. He made all these changes early enough in the summer, and from the pre-season tours, everyone could already tell that Arsenal were going to be a menace in the new season. And a menace is exactly what they're being right now. Arsenal plays like a unit right now and are brilliant going forward. Although they are largely a young team, they have just the right amount of experience to see them through the rough patches, with the likes of Partey, Xhaka, Jesus and Zinchenko having a wealth of experience in the Premier League between them. They are also really fearless. They have played 4 of the big 6 so far this season and have only lost 1 game, winning all of the remaining 3 against Liverpool, Chelsea and age-old rivals Spurs. And what's lovely to see for Gunners all around the world is that Arsenal are not just back to winning ways, they are also restoring their identity, their DNA. The team now looks very comfortable dictating the pace of the game, holding possession and building from the back, just as they used to do really expertly in the 90s and early 2000s under Arsene Wenger. And don't forget, trust in youth is part of the club's DNA. Players like Fabregas, Walcott, Wilshere were all given huge responsibilities at the club at really young ages, so it's nice to see Arteta go back to that philosophy. In all of this, huge credit has to go to the owners and the people running the club, because even when the screams were really loud from the fans, they chose to stay calm and trust the process, and that seems to now be yielding the results. Winning the Premier League title this season will be just perfect to crown all of Arsenal's efforts so far. But even if they end up not winning it this season, you would have to say they have indeed come a long way from where they were, and that alone deserves to be applauded.